This podcast is made possible by your support and your donations. Thank you. And by the purchase of my book called Everyday Buddhism, Real-Life Buddhist Teachings and Practices for Real Change. I will post an affiliate link to the book on Amazon in the show notes. And if you've already read it, please take a minute to rate and review. And also consider purchasing it again for a friend or family member as a gift. Welcome to Everyday Buddhism, making every day better by applying the proven tools found in Buddhist concepts. Welcome to episode 112 of Everyday Buddhism, Making Every Day Better. In this episode, I invited my friend and fellow Dharma teacher Scott Snibbe to join me for a conversation about Buddhist responses to the anxiety, apprehension, insecurity, fear, dread, and anger, and on, that many people are feeling now after the election. Scott Snibbe is a 25-year student of Tibetan Buddhism whose teachers include Lama Zopa Rinpoche and His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He is the author and host of How to Train a Happy Mind book and podcast, and leads meditation classes and retreats worldwide, with presentations infused with science, humor, and the realities of the modern world. Snibbe's new media art can be found in the collections of the Museum of Modern Art in New York City and the Whitney Museum of American Art and other institutions. He also has collaborated with musicians and filmmakers, including Björk, Philip Glass, Beck, and James Cameron. Listen in this conversation as Scott and I talk about the key to nonviolent communications, which is listening, how you don't have to agree with someone to understand them, and how when you're curious, you can't be angry. And no matter what other people believe, each is driven by a desire for happiness. And radical acceptance and how acceptance is transcendence. The conversation starts now. I'm joined by Scott Snibbe today. This was a ad hoc emergency podcast, I guess you'd call it. I had heard Scott's podcast where he was reflecting on with his own experience, his latest podcast, his own experience on the post-election angst or whatever you would call it. And I liked that he put himself on the line, and I immediately emailed and said, "Attaboy, you said it like it is." And as he expressed, and I hope you don't mind me sharing this a little bit, that you're always a little frightened to do that in these politically charged moments. And absolutely right. I mean, it is hard, but at the same time, I think from a Buddhist teacher, Dharma teacher standpoint, if we don't express the human feelings that we're dealing with, then it's hard to make a connection, because some people think somehow, I'm sure a lot of people say, "Oh, that Scott's got it all together and he never," but you expressed who you were and why you thought the way you thought, and all that was great. So I thought the perfect thing is for us, because we tend to get together and just talk. So I thought this would be a perfect thing. We would just talk about election angst and have you guys listen in. So Scott, well, here we are.
Thank you. I'm so thrilled to be here. I love your podcast, and I always love talking to you, and appreciate you having me back.
Yeah, I was going to do a threesome, but with Kimberly Brown, but she wasn't able to make it today on a recording schedule, so I might do another one with her. But because I wanted a different takes, and I think Scott and I might have enough of a different take that will be helpful. So Scott, you want to start by, and I don't want you to like give the whole deal that you just gave on your podcast, but do you want to start by saying, because actually your podcast was recorded, I think last week or
Mhm.
early this week, so things have changed, time has gone by, for you and for everybody else. What are your reflections as of now?
Well, um, what comes immediately to mind is this incredible statement from the Buddha who said, hatred never ceases hatred, only love ceases hatred. This is an eternal law. And it's quite strong and powerful statement. So, we in Buddhism, we see anger as such a deadly, we call it a poison, right? One of the three
Right.
poisons. And it's such a deadly emotion. And it's a lot of what got us here in terms of like a really, really contentious election. And also, it's a big part of the reaction to the election's aftermath. And so, I just thought about the antidotes to anger, you know. And what came to mind was this wonderful course I did with Tara Brach called Radical Self Acceptance.
Hmm.
And something she said there just stuck with me so long, which is that when you're curious, you can't be angry. and,
And
and it
it's so true. It's
Y-
so true. It
Yeah,
is.
and it's interesting because in Buddhism we normally learn that patience is the antidote to anger, that patience is like
Right.
non-harming. But I actually think what she says is more true, that it's curiosity, which is actually a branch of compassion, like that you're interested in why these other people voted differently than you. And by the
Right.
way, of course I voted one certain way, but I'm actually speaking to everybody, which is also very different than a lot of course, the people I know and a lot of the Buddhist responses I've seen also, which were almost solely aimed at liberals who didn't win,
Right.
you know.
Right.
But
Right.
but it really, and it's probably mostly liberals listening to this, but it's really geared towards everybody, absolutely everybody on both sides of this divide, to be curious about one another and to realize that 150, 170 million other people aren't, from one side, they think they're like crazy, racist, fascist, it said want to destroy democracy. On the other side, they're like communist, decadent,
Marxist. Yeah.
Marxists want to destroy like, our children and change everyone's gender. Like they're ridiculous stereotypes on both sides. And if you are curious and if you happen to even know and talk to people from the other side, you see that they came to different conclusions than you did about the issues, not from a point of insanity or extreme bias or hatred, but actually like a rational response to their conditions that they were raised in. So the biggest thing is that you don't have to agree with someone in order to understand them. Like this is the foundation of nonviolent communication is actually listening. Like step one of all nonviolent practices is listening. That you don't have to agree with someone to listen to them. You don't have to agree with someone to be compassionate to them. You don't have to agree with someone to have the humility to say, "Hey, maybe none of us knows for sure what's best for our country and what comes next, and maybe there's some mixture." And some common understanding we can come to. So anyway, I went into a lot of detail with that approach of understanding because the saddest thing I ever hear people say, and I hear it constantly, is I don't understand. Right? Like people say, I don't understand. I don't understand why they voted for that guy. I don't understand why they don't support this, why they do support that. And our job as human beings is to understand, right?
Yeah.
Even if you don't agree with it, but to understand how
Yeah.
the person came to that conclusion.
Yeah, a couple things that you mentioned there that, and actually I had thought about it when I listened to
Mm,
your podcast where you talked about this in that podcast episode. But first of all, the curiosity thing is absolutely true because I've often thought about that is
mm,
patience as an antidote to fear. Well, for most of us, patience is about as hard to to come to as anything. It's a, I know it's the antidote, and it does work when you hit on it, but most of us aren't patient. And so if we allow ourselves to be curious, it eventually sort of is a practice towards patience.
Yeah, yeah. You can be
Because
impatiently curious.
impatiently curious.
Just
I honestly could label myself as one that has gone through that impatient curiosity, right? And it's like, or reactive curiosity, or however you want to
yeah, yeah.
view it. But it is also a practice that if you stick with it, you're less likely to end up in judgment and bias because you're you've sort of blown open your mind to other possibilities.
Hmm.
And that's the one first thing I wanted to comment. And then the other thing that's related to it is I'm working on my second book. It's been a struggle. I started it at the beginning of the pandemic and I'm still slogging away.
Every book is a struggle.
Oh, it's the hardest doggone thing in the world to do. But I wanted to continue since my first book was sort of like structured around the Eightfold Path. I wanted to continue with starting with right view and right understanding, because in my mind, as a Buddhist practitioner and Buddhist teacher, I think the most important thing one can do is build that awareness of right understanding. It sounds easy. It's completely hard because nobody gets it. And I wanted to use something that I've thought about for years. Actually, I've thought about it, throughout this last decade or two or whatever, when this all this stuff started happening. Is There's a Spanish proverb called "In every head a world."
Mm.
In every head a world, and in every head a world means that it's like there's this sense of um, that we know this from meditation and Buddhist practice and Buddhist teachings that um, our thoughts, our consciousness, is what controls us. It
Hmm.
is what makes us move, not move, speak, not speak. It also, our thoughts are like I don't know, like a dust ball gathering up more dust, and the thing it gathers up is emotions. And when it gathers up the emotions, then we start acting only on those emotions, not even knowing where the thoughts come from. And then, unless you meditate and learn to meditate in an embodied way or somatic way, and you start feeling those feelings, which most of us don't do, as the Buddha taught. The Buddha taught that that's the primary cause of suffering. We react to either grasping on or pushing away, which is essentially the same action, just kind of on the flip side. So, so if we go around in our this little world of our own thoughts and emotions, which is really a jumbled mess, and it's very hard to distinguish one from the other, and that's why meditation or just a listening practice or a sitting still practice can help a lot. Um, then we can begin to understand that there is no right and then there is no wrong. Whatever I consider right is my world. But in that right, because we live in a dualistic world, um, it has to posit the other person being wrong, whoever that other is, right? So I go around with these opinions, and opinions are terrible. Opinions are lies, If so, if I'm right, I just have to remember that since that other person, that Scott, your head, your world over there, um, you have things that you think are right too, and none of them are discreetly right. None of them are like what would be the were so like a manifest universal right. There is no such thing. Now we
Hmm.
have ethics that guide our action, or maybe social political norms that guide our action. Um, but actions, but there is no universal mandated right. So once you kind of grasp that concept, even if you're not practicing it intensely, it allows you to look at others in a completely different way. It's like they're entitled to their world. And even if their world bumps into mine and makes me uncomfortable, they're still entitled to their world.
Mhm.
And that I think helps having a reactive othering that continues to cause division.
Yeah, and people shouldn't mistake that for like a kind of existentialist, that means
It's
I can do
not
anything and there's no consequences. But it's more like rewinding to the topic, which I just call cause and effect, like in the How to Train a
right.
Happy Mind, the book and the podcasts. Instead of saying karma, I just say cause and effect because it's psychological and anybody can understand it. And like another way to understand what you're saying, like to rewind to that topic of cause and effect and realize that I am a product of my entire life and circumstances, right? And so is everybody else. So when you think of the other person, say, who voted for the candidate you didn't, what if I was born to their parents? What if I
Right.
grew up in their town, in their country? What if I was exposed to their culture? What if I went to all of their same schools and had all their same friends and watched all the same TV shows and podcasts and ads
YouTubes and
and friends? And if I worked in the same places, if I did all of those things, I would probably making the same decisions they are now. Like, and then to have that shock of realizing, like, whoa, I'm also that product. I mean, it gets to this issue of free will, which we can set aside, but we are the product of this giant mountain, even without going to karma or past lives or anything like
right.
that. Just
Right.
in this life, we are the product of all of those things, and so is everybody else. And that's where that relative, what we call the relative truths are absolutely true for each person. It's kind of, I had this great realization when I did a 1 month retreat in January. And one of the realizations was related to that, which sounds quite trite, but to really feel it is powerful, is that everything up until this moment had to be that way. Because it is, because it is,
Well,
right?
because it is, right.
Because
That
it
it's
is like, it's not like God's will or something like that. It just is. You can think of it as God's will if you're Christian, and that's actually fine. But everything from this moment has an infinite possibility for good and for change. And that's extraordinary power of the Buddhist view. And you see it's already mixes so many topics together because just to think from that other person's point of view requires an enormous amount of compassion. And then, open it up to that candidate you didn't like. If it's, say, Donald Trump,
well,
think
like
of how he was raised. Think of a father that didn't love him
well,
and
it's
didn't
so
think he was good
obvious.
enough. Like
Yeah,
anybody, if you know anybody who their parents actually or met them, who our parents really didn't love them or actively hated them and despised them, it is very hard for those people to live a good life, to be ethical,
right.
to be kind. They never feel loved by anybody because they weren't loved by the two people who were supposed to love you unconditionally, your entire life. So if you were born into Donald Trump's circumstances,
You would be
you
Donald
would
Trump.
be Donald Trump. You would be
Exactly.
doing what he's
No,
doing.
exactly. My teacher used to talk about this in a way. It's like it's explaining emptiness, really. And then is like there's nothing discrete. I mean, there's no discrete right or wrong. There's no discrete me. There's no discrete you. There's no discrete Donald. It's things that are their processes, they are changed based on causes and conditions, like you said, and therefore they can change. So whatever we think we see now will change. It may change for the better, it may change for the
Yeah.
worse. But my teacher used to use the phrase person, place, and time. Always remember person, place, and time. Everything depends on person, place, and time. So that means that it depends on that person's situation and the people who interrelate with them. The place that they're in right now, whether that's a bad situation, a good situation, a bad country, a good country, a bad state, a good state, and time. When one of the things that can make us feel better is if we're on the side that feels that this could be the end of our democracy, and if we're thinking that way, um, there's a lot of countries that have undergone that. Almost every country. I think we're the last one that ever had to struggle with this.
Yeah.
So if that happened, I mean, life goes on. It may be different. It probably could be worse. But then again, every worse situation that I've had in my life always looks much worse from the beginning of it than after I've been in it a bit. You know what I'm saying? Because one of the things that that teaches us is acceptance. One of the most profound Buddhist teachings I've ever had is acceptance is transcendence.
Mm.
How we can transcend all this, everything, all the bad feelings, all the fears, all the anxiety, all the anger, all of it, if we learn to accept it. And now accepting, is typically thought of in a resignative sort of
Yeah.
way. It's like, I give up, we're lost. And that's not true acceptance. I was taught by my teachers that acceptance is dynamic. The in Buddhist psychology, which is taught by another one of my teachers, Greg Creech, who is one of the profound authoritative voices on Buddhist psychology and Morita therapy, which is very different than Western psychology. It's about essentially accepting things as they are rather than digging into the past to find out how you got there, although that is a helpful indicator. But acceptance is important to continue to live a happy life. If a lot of people, they lose their legs in an accident, and if I thought right now that I was going to lose my legs, well, the disaster that I would play out in my mind would be horrifying. But then if you meet someone, I just read a wonderful story, a blog by a guy who lost his legs and in talking about accepting things. Um, and he became he became a doctor. And he's living a very active and involved life. Because he was able to accept. If we're not able to accept, we can't do anything. We're
Yeah.
stuck in the same anger and the fear. And so one of the things that to remember is that no matter about all these different worlds in everybody's head, everybody's always only looking for one thing, like the Buddha said, and Dalai Lama said, happiness. They're all
Yeah.
looking for happiness. It's just that the way they think they're going to get happiness is maybe different than the way we think we're getting happiness. But we also trick ourselves into thinking that only this will cause us happiness. Only this. And I mean, I'll put myself on the line there like you did in your podcast because I haven't done this yet publicly.
Mm. Go for it.
Hey, go for it. Sure, easy for you to say. Who knows how I'm going to be received? Uh, the thing about it is that I was talking to you prior to hitting record is that I feel that what we went through in 2016, 2015, 2016 was practice for this. And I was pretty much a disaster back then. And then the pandemic also spilled me into a trauma. I was a
Mm.
disaster then. Um, and so I've had all this practice for disasters. And I did have a day or two of complete like shock and disaster fatigue. It's obvious from the way I'm talking. People know that I'm a liberal and
Yeah,
I didn't want
that's
Donald Trump
okay.
to win. And so although I have Donald Trump people around me, I under I it's not like I don't know them. But the thing about, and they're all different with all different reasons for what they believe. But I did go through a momentary like I give up. Yeah, I'm done. I can't take this anymore. I'm going to bury my head in the sand. I'm doing a little of that only just to save my sanity.
Mhm.
But and I think what we learn to do is if we can learn to quiet our minds and not just keep doing the habit. We live in a like a righteous anger culture, a rage culture that was built on the media and social media and the internet, not to blame them, but and which just continually fans the flames of, not reactivity and all that. So, and instead of, we may know in our heart, like we may have been a meditator before, 2015 and 2016, and before, between the last 4 years and vice versa. And then when we got into this, we forgot to do that again, and
Mhm.
we fell into like doom scrolling and rage scrolling and burying ourselves in fortresses built on fear and othering and rage. And consequently, we lost our ability to connect with what we want, which is happiness, compassion for
Yeah.
others. And we completely lost that. So, you
Yeah.
know, that's what I'll say. It's like I began I sort of rebooted my meditation practice in this last year to the point of being pretty vigorous, and I changed the style of meditation. So I now can really quiet myself really fast. I don't
Yeah.
have, it's like almost instantly. I hate to say it. It doesn't last and it's not perfect, but it doesn't mean that I won't have a reaction like I did, but I learned that practice makes perfect. And we can't give up. That's why there's only one thing we can do is acknowledge and accept in a dynamic way by doing something positive.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very, very strong position that Buddhism has, is that we don't have external enemies, that our only enemies are anger,
Right.
craving, and let's say self-centeredness is a simple way to say it, ignorance. Um, but like to really internalize that, I'm lucky because I was kind of raised that way. Like my mom used to always tell me if I was angry, she'd say, who are you hurting? It's only yourself. You know, when you're
Wow.
angry, like that other person, they're not here. You're not
No,
harming
right.
them. They don't even know about it. They might be out having a ball, eating ice cream, but you're miserable. Like for your own for your own sake. Like, but you really need to internalize that. And you do as you
Do.
become a Buddhist for a long time. Like Shanti Davis says, there's no fault worse than anger. Like
Yes.
it's it's like literally like poison. And I asked my teacher once, how do I deal with anger? He's like, oh, well, that's the easy one, isn't it? Because anger doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good when you're angry.
Exactly.
And I was like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And then I wrote down in huge letters, anger doesn't feel good, in my notebook. But like there isn't really a solution for anybody from the Buddhist perspective until you acknowledge this. Like until you say, my real enemies are anger, attachment, and self-centeredness. And once I free myself from them, I will be better at opposing the people who I disagree with in the world, actually. Because when you're angry, you do really, really stupid, harmful
Crazy
things.
things. Yeah.
Like you're not effective at being an activist. That's why a lot of like liberal activists, their groups are always fighting with one another because they're angry. And the
They're
angry, it's
so right.
contagious.
It
Angry,
is.
anger is, and then you go home and you're angry, and you yell at your wife, you yell at your kids, you get divorced, your kids hate you. Like you really need, but the Buddhist perspective is you don't just hear this once. Like you actually need to think about this every day. Like that's what we do with, going through the
Eh,
stage of the path. Every day you think like anger, craving, ignorance. Like these are my only real enemies. And if I get rid of them, I'll be a better political activist. If that's what I want to do. I'll be better at
eh,
making the world a better place. I won't be apathetic. I'll be more effective.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. It's like the Buddha said, it's like holding a hot coal,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you're not throwing it at them. They're not getting the hot. You're just holding the hot coal, right? And,
Yeah.
and it's like it's totally true. There's another thing that goes along with that is that these scary, this stuff that happens, the three poisons, which is, anger, greed, and delusion, or confusion, or however you
Yeah.
want to put it. It's just in Shin Buddhism. You know how in Christianity there's the original sin, right? And
Yeah.
in Shin Buddhism, you might have a lot of times we refer to this thing in Shin Buddhism that where they accept that we are ignorant people, That's a
Mm.
lot of the practices. They just accept we are all ignorant people, and they call it bamboo. We have bamboo nature. We have ignorant
Mm.
nature. Now we do have a nature of natural goodness inside, which is our Buddhist nature.
That's
But
deeper, right?
that's deeper.
Yeah.
But the stuff on the surface, where we get tossed along in the
Yeah.
waves, right? You know, ignorance makes us hang out up there, right? We don't
Just
go
driven by our delusions. Yeah, most
right.
look at your actions. What's motivating them, right?
Yeah, it's like I'm not going to get into Plato's cave, but it's like reflections on the wall. They're not real. They're stuff that our heads have
Yeah.
made up, and yet we believe them to be completely true. And the more we feel them and allow ourselves to feel them and do the doom scrolling and the rage scrolling
Yeah.
and all that stuff, the deeper and stronger the surface waves get. It becomes like almost like a tsunami. It just keeps growing on itself, and there's no way to dive down to that deep stillness by at that time because we're just fighting to stay alive. That's all. We're fighting so we won't drown. Um, there's a motto that I referred to Greg Creech, my Buddhist psychology teacher.
Mm.
He says this motto that I really love. It's called "Not happening now."
Mm.
So we have a lot of fear, a lot of dread about things that are going to happen. And from a personal standpoint, I have a lot more skin in the game than a lot of people. I have less skin in the game than a lot of people as well. I'm not an immigrant. I'm not on the edge of poverty. But I am a gay woman in a marriage. I'm elderly, living on Social
Hmm.
Security.
Hmm.
All those things can be taken away from me. I can
Yeah.
think about that all the time if I want. Um, but I don't want because it's not happening now. It could happen, but it's not happening now. So, and one of the mottos he used that's tied to that is our feelings are our feelings, our
Mm.
actions, our actions. The space in between is freedom.
Yeah.
And if we
Yeah.
can remember that, in my personal experience, I'll just tell this one other little anecdote and turn it over to you because now I'm blabbing. But you know, most people know that I lost my hair in
Yeah.
2021 from uh I have an autoimmune disease, and they believe it was the a series of COVID vaccines that made that happen because
Mm.
it boosted my autoimmune response,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then my body attacked my hair follicles of all things. I guess it's better than attacking my kidney or something, but it was my
Yeah.
hair.
No,
um
it's a shame. Yeah.
and so I lost all my hair. I don't have one hair on my body, not my eyelashes. And if you don't have eyelashes, it's not really comfortable. And no eyebrows, no hair anywhere. and
Yeah. I
and
thought you were just like trending towards none when I first
No,
saw,
no,
but you
no.
explained. Yeah. I'm
Yeah,
so
no,
sorry.
actually, it's actually, yeah, I have a good profession
Yeah.
for it. And it's cool. I don't have to shave my head because no, no, hair never appears. Once in a
Mm.
while, one odd one will show up. But accepting that was pretty hard, especially when I was already aging and things, you know, when you age, you wake up in the morning, you look at your face and you say, "Ooh, is that who I am now? Wow, I just can't believe it." And then when you go past the mirror and all of a sudden you have no hair, it's like, "Whoa, is that
Mm.
who I am now?" It's like unbelievable. Every time I walk past the mirror, I think I look like my father, because
Yeah.
that's how he looked at it when he was older. But no, actually he had a pretty good head of hair, but but I mean grandfather was bald. But the thing about it is I never thought I could accept this.
Yeah.
Never, never, never. And it made me, you know, woe is me, why me, blah, blah, blah. But I was able to accept it by just accepting it. I mean, this is the way things are now. I don't know
Yeah.
how they're going to be. I mean, my hair follicles aren't damaged. They just don't work. And so I could get hair. I did get hair back for a little bit in 2023. And I had it for 6 weeks and then it fell out again. So,
Yeah.
yeah. And so the funny thing is that people keep saying, well, you just got to have positive attitude and you have to have hope. This is sort of like, I call it, what's that? term. You'll know what I'm talking about, but
Oh,
um
yeah, the like manifesting,
thing,
positive.
yeah,
It's a new age belief that if you want something enough, it just appears. Like if you stare at your bills, they'll get paid, and
yeah, I don't.
want yeah.
That's never worked for me, but I do. But a lot of, and that's how every, and nobody really knows what to say, so I don't blame them for saying that. But the thing is I told, and my spouse says it too. It's like, and I said, I can't have hope. Hope is unreal. And I think from a Buddhist perspective, you can have some positive inclination, you can hold intention, but to hold on to hope is to not hold on to things as they are. And if we hold on to
Yeah.
hope, we don't see things as they are. And that was a good lesson for me
Yeah.
because and so I don't hold on to hope, but that's not a resignation or a giving in. It's an acceptance of the way things are right now.
Yeah, and also and of the power of the mind. Like Buddhism says, it's like everything comes from your mind. Your reality comes from your mind. What does that mean? Like people hear that and they think, "Oh, I think if I think of a teacup, it'll appear in front of me." That's not what it means. What it means is like when you looked in the mirror at first and it's like, "Oh my God, I don't like that appearance." Yet your partner looking at you, or let me looking at you right now, thinks, "Oh, it's beautiful, Wendy." Like, like most, I think everyone who knows you, right? We see your face, and it just brings delight. Like, oh, beautiful person who says such nice
Oh,
things. It makes my
oh.
life right. So it's like when your own view, it's so sad in our culture, right? Like when your view of yourself is like worse than everyone
What?
else's.
This is a good
Like,
point. Yeah.
like who's right, right? But then like move out to the and I too, I got like half hair,
I
but I
know.
used to have it out to here, and I wish sometimes too. But then I asked my wife, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I find you so beautiful." My daughter's like, "Oh, you're so handsome," right? Like people
Yeah.
love you, right? So, but it's the mind, right? Like despite the people loving us, finding us attractive as we are, we ourselves then project, oh, I need to have this, I need to have that. And then
Yeah.
of course, like to project it to the election, right? Like because they say the mind is a source of reality. Dependent origination is what this is, emptiness,
Exactly.
right? So we look at the election. Donald Trump was elected. Half the people, a little less than half the people, are
Less
in
than half.
agony. And it's like the worst thing in their mind, and they're totally convinced. The other, a little bit more than half, are delighted. They're so delighted. Which one is right? Right? So you
There
could
is no
say,
right.
well, I mean, you could say, oh, well, it's the majority is probably right. Then they see, because that's sometimes they say that in Buddhism, like it's the valid cognizer. So it's the one. So then he's like, whoa, well, then the Trump voters must be right if there's a majority of them. No, that's not the case. It's just different perspectives. And just to accept that, it sounds so darn simple, but it's
Yeah.
so mind blowing. Like, my perspective is one of many, and to acknowledge that those people are thrilled and I'm miserable doesn't negate our perspective. It doesn't change like that we want to make certain things happen in the world and avoid others. But it's mind-blowing, and it's an antidote to anger. Like you can't be angry. I really don't get angry anymore. Like it took a long time, like 25 years of being a Buddhist. It was really only the last like year really, like the
Yep.
last, 18 months or so. But it's just I find it impossible because especially with like Donald Trump, because like something happens and I was like, how could it be otherwise? Like how can I be angry? Look at the cause and effect of
Yeah.
this person's life, or with Joe Biden and policies towards the war in the Ukraine and stuff that I disagree with. I don't like it. It almost makes me angry because I really want it to stop. But I was like, well, look at the guy and how he was raised. And he has a very dualistic view of right and wrong, enemies and friends. And he can't really see the world in the universal love, like
Yeah.
wanting to care for all and or a principle of nonviolence. Like some people, most people, in fact, I think really believe that violence works, despite all the evidence that it doesn't work as a solution. I disagree with that. I'm in a small minority of people who's really committed to nonviolence, the way, Buddhist principles start. But most people believe violent solutions do help with problems.
Well, I do. I definitely agree with you. It's sort of like I agree with you in theory.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Um, but as we have seen from my 7 decades of life,
Mm.
is uh, nonviolence can work, and we have seen it in apartheid, in Gandhi's life, and
Civil rights movement, yeah.
somewhat in um,
Martin Luther King
Martin
Jr.
Luther King Jr. Somewhat, even though it didn't really instill a permanent solution. These
Mm.
things, because there is no permanent solution. That's right. If we accept that all things constantly change, there, we can't say, okay, this is the permanent solution, right? It's going to change. Things will change maybe for the better in this situation for some people, and that it'll also change for the worse in this situation for some, like those happy Trumpy people out right now. And I don't mean that derogatory, it's just a way to say it. Those
Yeah,
happy people will could easily, and I can see this playing out already, could easily not be so happy because their expectations, right, of what would happen if Trump became president again will be blown up because
yeah,
they may have expectations. Oh, my eggs are going to get cheaper. Well, your eggs may not get cheaper if
yeah.
he rolls out the economic plans that he says he is. So that's just proof of nothing. Change, and all we can accept is what's happening now, not
Yeah.
happening now.
Yeah, and craving is the flip. Craving or attachment is the flip side of anger, right? Like that's what you're
Yeah,
saying. Like if you're so attached, I mean, that's why many people abandoned the current administration and Democrats because they're disillusioned. They thought, oh, we're
right.
voting for these people. It's a change. It'll be more compassionate. Things will be good economically. We would like won't get into wars. Well, that didn't happen. We were like in these in big wars, and the prices went up, and many people are disillusioned. So yeah, it's better to be open, to make your best choices you can based on information, but to acknowledge, anything's possible in the future. To be ready. That's the irony of being a Buddhist, is like to really think in detail about all the problems that could happen actually makes you quite happy because you're just ready for them. You're ready to face them immediately and, be compassionate. They have, there is this subtle distance. Like in our like Tibetan Buddhism, we study these 51 mental factors, like we break
Yep.
down the mind. And because people often ask, like, oh, aren't there healthy desires? Aren't there healthy cravings? Well, we use a different word for it, according to like this Abhidharma system,
It's
which is
Abhidharma. Yep.
aspiration.
Right.
So there's like craving is like, I have to have this thing or I won't be happy. Trump has to be elected or I won't get happy. The war has to end or
Or I
I
won't get.
can't be happy until the war ends. That's exaggerated. That's a delusion. That's craving. Um, Aspiration is aspiring to accomplish positive things, beneficial things in the world. And that's like, I would like there to be world peace, and I'll do my best for that. I would like to have enlightened leadership in our world, like leaders who are kind and compassionate, work for the best of humanity, and I'll do my best for that. But you don't have the tightness of like, I can't be happy until this
Ah,
happens. I'll be miserable.
yeah. Yeah, and you can tell you when you have that tightness.
Yeah.
You ignore it most of the time, but if you're in touch with your body and you do some body scans, or a bit of somatic meditation, you can feel when you are constricting or tightening around a certain
Yeah.
um desire or thought or emotion. And one of the ways that it can you can make it say bye bye is looking at it. Okay. If you've ever tried, okay, this is a trick that I have learned in meditation. And a lot of people, most people, when they think about meditation, like you do primarily analytical meditation, which I've done, this is a little different.
Mhm.
But most people who do meditation think of thoughts as enemies, or sort of like the
Yeah.
prohibitive factor of
Yeah.
being a good meditator, because they're going into it with the thought, just like if you go into it with the thought that I won't be happy unless Kamala Harris is elected, or I won't, I won't be happy unless the war in Ukraine is over. I won't be happy if you think that I won't be happy because I am having these thoughts, and that because I'm having these thoughts, I am not having peaceful meditation. Well, meditation doesn't have to be peaceful, and many times it's
No,
not anywhere
no.
near peaceful. But if one of the tricks is to see the insubstantiality of thought, the insubstantiality of emotion. If you have a thought, instead of like saying, "Oh, thought, I have a thought," and then you start beating yourself up for having that thought, or you're thinking about, like, you're planning the day, you're thinking about your dinner, you're thinking about what you have to do the next day. You're thinking about this podcast, or whatever you're doing. And then you can beat yourself up because you had a thought, and now you're not peaceful anymore, and you're chasing that thought. Well, everybody knows that the minute you notice, your awareness of the thought, you've already kind of won half the battle because you're aware that you're having the thought.
Hmm.
You're not blindly running down the road chasing it. Now, the other cool thing that you can do that's a cool practice, and I would recommend everybody try this, is if you have a thought, instead of like being annoyed by it, or just acknowledging it is good. That's a good way, a practice of noticing thoughts come up while you're having meditation. Because if you do an analytical meditation, you're actually purposely having thoughts, but they're different kind of thoughts. But if you're doing another kind of meditation, a shamatha, or direct awareness, or Zen, or whatever, you sort of want to get this clearness of mind, this calm, clear lake of mind. It doesn't mean you are calm, but you do want to get this calm, clear lake of
Yeah.
mind, which tends to build patience and equanimity. But if you have a thought, one of the tricks is to quickly turn around and try to catch it.
Mm.
Just try that sometime. It's impossible. You cannot catch it. You will not be able to hold on to it unless it's some one of your, habitual anger stories or something. But if it's just the thought for dinner or something, then turn around and catch it. Or turn around and say, where did that come from?
Mm.
I mean, you ask yourself now, where do they come from? And when it goes, where did it go?
Yeah.
Where did it go? It's like it's about as substantial as steam, or a cloud. It's not substantial at all. And any emotions that you allow to be rolled up by that thought are equally insubstantial.
Yeah.
You can acknowledge them, but just like I said, try to hold on to it. If you're not already holding on to it, you can't.
Yeah. No, and it takes practice and it's a step above mindfulness. It's why I put it in the book, like before anything was these meditations on the mind, which are
I know.
usually sort of very advanced, like they call
Right.
Mahamudra or Dzogchen, and
Dzogchen, yeah, that's what
but
I'm
um
practicing.
but just to see that there's the mind and then there's thoughts that appear in it and to be curious. Again, it's about being
It's
curious.
curious,
So
right?
to be curious, what is that space? Like, wow, there's some space or something in which thoughts appear, and sometimes there's no thoughts at all. And if I leave them alone, the thoughts just come and go. And I'm not my thoughts,
No,
And
no.
you're like, and then you start to ask that deep question, what am I? Oh, maybe I'm that space of the mind. But like it was one of the most important early things I learned from my teachers was you're not your thoughts. Because I was like, what do I do with this? What do I do with this horrible dream or like
Yeah.
dream I was cheating on my partner or whatever, violent dream or thoughts that pop into my head? They're like, and it's like they're just thoughts. They just go by if you don't let them control your body and your speech, and they
Right.
just pass they just pass by. And to realize like we're not immediately in control of our mind. The way we're
No.
in control of our mind is to condition it. That's why meditation is so important because you condition yourself with these extraordinarily good, beneficial, positive, calming also thoughts and gradually and ways of thinking and turning things around. And gradually that starts to infuse your daily life and you remember your because now even if like a thought of like that jerk or something it's like it's like seeing a piece of poop I'm about to step into. It's like, oh, okay, I got to avoid that. It's like that extreme or you're like, oh my God, that's my enemy. That thought is my
Uh,
enemy. Let's just let that go and move on.
That's so funny because I just heard a teacher teach the other day saying, and it cracked me up then, and it's cracking me up now, and related to the poop is that is is if 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 next time you catch yourself doing that angry jerk thing, right? And or why does my spouse always leave the sponge here when it should be over there? I mean,
Yeah.
something ridiculous, but it's the stuff that can get you riled up pretty quickly for whatever stupid reason. So anyway, anytime you catch yourself having those things, say it out loud. Go into a
Mm.
private room and say all
Mm.
that anger and that stupid stuff out loud and keep repeating it.
Mm.
And eventually you'll start laughing at yourself because you'll see how
It's
ridiculous it
ridiculous.
is.
Yeah.
It's totally
Yeah.
ridiculous. I tried it once with this the other day after I heard the teaching with just a silly little thing. A lot of times you can just be frustrated by a neighbor doing something or something, and you know, and in my mind, the word jerk does come up a little quite
Yeah.
a bit sometimes. And it's like, I just played it all out. I just spit it all out, semi-verbally because I
Yeah.
didn't want to disturb the
Yeah.
family. And it really did become like, well, you ignorant fool, you. Why are
Yeah.
you, why?
Yeah.
How is this helping anything?
Yeah, with our it's very, very instructive with our partners, especially because we learned something. Like my wife and I have been married for 15 years. We've gone through different therapies when we had problems in our relationship. One of the most effective was this thing called imago therapy, which was actually designed more by Christians.
Uh-huh.
But there's something really beautiful they say, which is like if any criticism comes, and this Buddhism says exactly the same thing, Mahayana Buddhism, if any critical thought comes into your mind about your partner, immediately antidote it with all their good qualities. So,
Yeah.
my teacher Elaine Jackson taught me this because she's been married a couple times, like me.
Yeah.
And so the minute I think about my wife, like, oh, why does she leave that out? Why doesn't she,
Yeah.
spend more time with me? Whatever. Then I think, wait, she loves me more than anyone else in the world. And she's my
Yeah.
best friend,
Yeah.
and she's dedicated her whole life to our life together. Like the positives are so extremely beyond, the sponge, the little annoyances, like thing. But that's what you kind of need to do with everything. And again, like to bring back to the election, you look at the people who voted for Donald Trump, they're 45% like they tried to frame this as election about, women electing a female
Or
president, whatever.
or
45,
gender
like if you're
or
a
race.
feminist, if you're
Yeah.
and it just doesn't map that way. Like
No, it
people are
doesn't.
complicated, and 45% of women, voted for Donald Trump, and so many, majority of Latinos, like a huge amount of immigrants
Which
voted
is
for the
which
but
is you
and
you
it's
you can't reconcile that with any bit of your brain. You cannot
well, no,
reconcile,
but the thing is, you
but you
have to.
can.
You have
Yes.
to
Yeah,
because it's there in the newspaper. I went and read, and all
I
these
did too.
people, they're like, we're legal immigrant. We went through the system. It was hard. It took years, decades,
Well,
and we think the other people's again without agreeing or disagreeing. Like, don't
it's
worry
just
about our opinions, but that is their perspective. To just say
that is there.
that is how they think,
I
and it's
I
reasonable. It's
it,
totally
it
reasonable.
is totally reasonable, and I actually heard an interview with an illegal immigrant and
Yeah.
his family who said, "We're fine. We work.
Mm.
We've never committed a crime. They're
Yeah.
not going to round us up."
Yeah.
Now, that may be wishful thinking, but then again, you can totally relate to that. I mean, how
Yeah.
can you not relate to that? You can relate to
Yeah.
that. It's just, we either live in our fortresses of fear or in our tribal silos, and
Yeah.
a lot of us we can't go there.
Yeah.
You
But
know,
you for your own sake of your own happiness, like you really have to go. Like I had one of my most compassionate friends, this guy, never really even heard him say a bad word about anybody. I saw him post on Facebook, like I can't come to any other conclusion that every person who voted for Donald Trump is, a fascist racist. And I'm like, oh boy. I mean, of course I don't post anything, but I'm thinking, oh, it's just not true. You go and do the research. Like it's such a long list. Like why did people vote for Donald Trump? Because they wanted to end the war in the Ukraine. Like they don't want the money, the effort, the death on both sides. They want that to stop. Abortion, this very, very intense issue. Like if you, I'm sure you may have had, some people listening may have had an abortion, know people who've had abortions. That is a very complicated issue. And I know people who had abortions and went both ways. Some like
Sure, it
really
can be
then against
emotionally,
really
yeah,
people who have very strong religious convictions and feel like Donald Trump is the better path despite
despite the
his
fact that he,
distasteful character. People, economics, I'm always looking up the statistics because I heard once this vast amount of Americans don't even have $100 in the bank
right,
savings. Like if
exactly.
they lost their job, they're just boom, like really, really in bad shape, 2 weeks later. So I looked it up after this election. It's 25% today of
Yeah,
Americans. They don't even
that's,
have $100 in savings. So they're like, well, what happened these last 4 years? This this
but the
report that they keep saying from the Federal Reserve says
that's the
everyone's
best
doing great.
economy ever.
But
Yeah,
I'm
they,
not. I'm not. And maybe this
yeah,
next guy will be better. We can go
it,
on and on. Like it's such a long list of reasons that people
and
could
then and
reasonably
actually, all the results haven't even showed up yet. They haven't even done the deep dive of the demographics and so
Yeah.
forth. It's
Yeah.
just a tertiary, part of it.
Yeah.
But well, if you look at this about being, like I talked about in Shin Buddhism, that we're all ignorant beings, right? We're
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
ignorant, or you can just say another word that we use that Shin Buddhists use, ordinary beings, just ordinary beings.
Yeah.
We're not
Yeah. Or
we're not
deluded,
deluded.
deluded,
Just
clouded. Yeah.
have to accept that we when we got packaged, there's a heavy dose of delusion that's put in, and that delusion works on every way. And so when somebody hears you say what you just said, well, they think this or they think that and they think that, and you think to yourself, well, that's total delusion. I mean,
Nonsense.
you
Yeah.
can't believe that. And then, but if you talk about how liberals thought, and I was certainly one of them, I will admit, I was like hanging on to the fact that they were going to have Medicare was going to support in-home care for the elderly. I thought that's cool because we're a gay couple. We've been married 44 years.
Congratulations.
So
Yeah.
I have practice. But
You have to get married in Denmark or something.
well, we've
Yeah.
been together in 44.
Yeah.
We've
Yeah.
been together 44 years. We got
Yeah.
married as soon as it was legal in
Yeah. Yeah.
2011. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Although we were heading to Canada, but it happened quick here, so
Yeah.
that was good.
Good.
But the thing about it is, if the federal government like outlaws it, if I died, my wife wouldn't have my Social Security, and I was always the primary breadwinner. And
It's a big deal. It's a
yeah,
really big
it's a
deal.
big, like I said, I got skin in the game. But the thing about it is if somebody looks at the way I thought, that I'm like holding my hopes for all that stuff, and that they would think, well, what a delusion. You're holding on to something that's ridiculous, and it's like we all see that in each other. Hard to see in myself. I actually, you know. I don't see that I was being ridiculous, but I accept the fact that I didn't embrace completely the thought that this actually could happen, even though we saw that it happened in 2016. I should have believed. They kept saying it was going to be a close election, but I was still like,
Yeah.
um, oh my God, this honestly happened. Come on. And so, but again, right now it's just I'm not, I won't go to yeah, I have to keep myself away from any kind of talking heads because
Yeah.
all those
So
opinions are just,
divisive.
oh, they're terrible. I mean, on television, on social media, on YouTube, and I even quit watching any news source in the last year and only read it. Well, even the reading it is divisive and hard.
No, all the sources are divisive and very biased, from
I
one
will
perspective or another for the most part. Yeah.
I'll plug what could go right.
Oh
There's
yeah,
a
there are a couple like that. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'll plug
That's
that.
nice.
That newsletter I had her on my podcast,
Yeah.
Emma Vavrlukas. She's the
Yeah.
director of that
Yeah. There's
foundation.
also this magazine I subscribe to called The Week because I kind of got sick of the like daily crazy news cycle.
Right.
And it's really neat because it summarizes the whole week, but then it puts it like on both sides, like what
I love it.
conservatives are saying, what liberals are saying. It's like, oh wow, I'm not even getting this stuff. I like to see their perspective. There's something you said earlier though that's really, really important, which is this fundamental goodness, that at least in Mahayana Buddhism, there's a view that beneath all that delusion you're talking about is fundamental goodness, which is that people are fundamentally good. They want to be happy. They want to, a safe home, healthy
Right.
meals, nice friends, some satisfying life, meaningful work. Like everybody wants that. No, in Palestine, in Texas, in the White House, Republicans, Democrats, everybody. Yeah,
California,
Jill
New
Stein.
York.
Everybody wants the same thing. And then this is language that comes from the nonviolent communication, is that it's in the strategies that we differ and sometimes go awry. So, like with Vladimir Putin, I always use as a good example because few people listening will love him. And but then what are his fundamental needs? He wants to have a safe, secure nation. He wants it economically thriving. He wants to not be threatened by other countries, militarily and secure borders and all that stuff. When people want the greatness of Russia, those are all, reasonable needs. Strategies of, invading another country, killing hundreds of thousands of people of his people and of Ukrainians, creating global tensions that could destroy the whole world. We went awry, right? Like but it's only the strategies. Like to,
Right.
to acknowledge his fundamental needs doesn't mean his strategies aren't harmful. They do seem to be extremely harmful and not beneficial, and in many cases, not accomplishing even his goals. But we're all like that. We're all like that. We have the fundamental goodness, the fundamental healthy, reasonable needs. And then the strategies we take, and especially strategies of acting out of anger and craving and self-centeredness, that's where the world gets screwed up and our minds get
Okay.
harmed.
So I'm going to ask you a question that you absolutely cannot answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Is this, what about the people who say, okay, yeah, everybody might be fundamentally good. Trump might be fundamentally good. Putin might be fundamentally good. The Serbian dictator over there, or whatever his name is, might
Yeah.
be fundamentally good. Um, the Hungarian, Turkish, you go along and see all the people who they're ruining their country. Now it's Argentina, um, and so they took the wrong strategies. If we sit around embracing their fundamental goodness in our hearts or whatever, are there some people who say that if we just meditate on that goodness and that fundamental goodness, that can change the world? I don't believe that personally, but uh, but it, you, like we taught, you referenced earlier, like angry protesters. I'm totally with you on the angry protesters. It's like sometimes protesters um, are protesting. They're energized by anger. It burns them out. It causes more division rather than being energized by something more positive. So, a person who asks you, well, then what is the solution?
Yeah, the solution is compassion. And also
But
like
how
with
does
anger.
compassion, I mean, if somebody's looking at this from a practical, I had this discussion with a really strong nonviolent
Yeah.
idealist who now I can't remember his name, but he wrote a most wonderful book. Um, and he's kind of old now. He's traveled the world for peace. Oh,
Mm.
what's his name? I
Not
forgot.
Marshall Rosenberg.
No, no, no. He's a Hispanic. I forget his name now, but
Mm.
um uh and I kept pushing back on that idealistic message
Mhm.
because people do. I mean, it's like and it's like we're in a culture that is essentially pragmatic at its heart,
Mhm.
right? And we're all about, well, what will fix it? What will fix it? And when someone says compassion, that seems absolutely ridiculous.
Well, of course you have to unpack it because it's not just being like, I love everybody, everything's good. That's not compassion.
Kumbaya.
Compassion just means understanding. It means understanding. So someone once asked Matthew Ricard, the great Buddhist
Yeah.
monk, they
Uh-huh.
said, if you could spend 24 hours with anybody in the world, who would it be? And he said, Vladimir Putin.
Oh my goodness.
because he'd
Yeah.
like to really understand him and really talk about like the causes of happiness and suffering. Like this conflict is only going to end through negotiation. The way to, and I think you and I and other people, we've done different types of negotiations, business conflicts. The
Right.
only way they work out is when you really, really listen and really understand the other person. Nonviolence doesn't mean just not doing violent things. That's actually a tiny part of it. It's this complex, 6-step process, like King Martin Luther King, Kingian nonviolence. And the very first part is like research and then dialogue, right? So
Right, right,
and
right.
there's 6 steps. I got this from Kazu Haga, who wrote an extraordinary book called Healing Resistance. The episode from a couple weeks ago is with him. And he says of those 6 steps of nonviolent political action or just, action between human beings, only one of them is optional. And that one is the action, is actually, going out protesting,
Right.
because it's actually you don't always have to do that. And actually, if you do it well, you often don't because you do your research, you have dialogue. So it's just wise. It's just wise. It might take some time, but it works. And now there's so much evidence. Twice as many conflicts have been successfully ended through nonviolence than violence. And just for people listening who might disagree, just ask yourself, which of the wars since World War II that the United States has conducted, started, participated in, which of those do you think were effective? The Korean War, the Vietnam War, the invasion of Iraq, the
Cracker.
invasion of Afghanistan,
Right.
now the Ukrainian War, the Israel and Palestine? Does anybody listen think any of them were effective? And these current ones are going to be effective or end well, right? The Ukrainian conflict is going to be negotiated. There's going to be some. This is why I think a lot of people voted for Trump. The
Yeah.
end to
Because
this
he
war is
said
only
that.
through negotiation,
Yeah.
but through negotiation, people give some things up. It's not, and so then the people make an exaggerated claim who say we don't want to give Putin what he wants. In a negotiation, each side gets a little bit of what they want, each side gets what they don't want. Like we actually do. We actually do want to give him a little bit of what he wants. We want to give the Ukrainians a lot of what they want. And
What?
through that negotiation, people's fathers and husbands will stop dying. Like the
Yeah,
the the the,
exactly.
the consequences are so extreme, right? Like of not negotiating, of not getting into dialogue, of having these extreme views like no, it's 100% or nothing. That means today hundreds of people's husbands died, hundreds of people's of fathers died,
Kids.
hundreds of people's brothers, sisters, sons, daughters, children died. Like we can't do that. We can't do that. Like that's the perspective is like we need to that's the perspective of nonviolence. That violence has to stop. More violence isn't going to end that problem. It's not working.
You
Like
know, I
the
agree with you. And I
yeah.
and I knew, see, you did answer it on the spot. Bravo. But I'm not going to do it but
Sure, sure. No,
against
keep
you.
pushing if you want, because it all just comes from my teachers and the
No,
wonderful people I've learned from.
and I'm just channeling stuff I hear from others, and just so
Oh, it's
people know
great. Yeah,
that
bring it
that's
on. Bring it on. Let's talk about because we're not hearing this in the mainstream. It's just like we're
no,
gonna
no,
fight, even though
no,
it
no.
made me so sad. Even seeing Kamala's, speech at the end, she's like, "We're gonna keep fighting. We're in the battle. Like we are the most lethal for like the language and culture of violence has so permeated our society. It's like
It
even
is.
when we talk about peace, we talk about violence.
No, no, exactly right. And it's been a violent culture for forever,
Yeah, yeah,
but like we're a rage machine lately
yeah,
in the past decade or so. But to illustrate your point, I always, because I'm the everyday Buddhist, to bring
yeah,
things back to how people can relate to it within their lives.
yeah.
Nobody can relate to sitting down and negotiating with Putin. Come on, we can't. We can't relate to
No,
Putin.
but you've had to negotiate with your partner. You've had to
Oh,
negotiate
I
with
was
your
just gonna
neighbor,
say
your
that.
family at work,
That's just what I was gonna
all day
say.
long, right? Yeah, go on.
If you're in a relationship, even with your spouse, with a boss, with a coworker, like you say, with a neighbor, um, but spouses are probably the
Yeah.
best ones to use because there's most at stake there, and there's probably more. emotions related to that. But if you go into a conflict with your spouse saying, "I have to get what I want, 100%. That's it." Now, how do you win in that situation? You
Yeah.
can't win. You will not get 100% of what you want at all. If you make that claim that you want whatever that thing is that you want the thermostat at 70 and it will never change. You will not you will it won't happen if your spouse wants it at 72. So you have to find a way. You have to be clever. You have to listen to what the other person is saying. Like you say, like you have to understand now, why do they think that way? And maybe if you understand why they think that 72 is better than 70, or what would be the causes and conditions that would make them believe that, then you might be able to come up with a actual good solution that's a little outside the box and is
Yeah.
totally away from what you were demanding. So that's the everydayness of the thing. And it's if it's applicable to Scott and his spouse and me and my spouse and your listener and your spouses or significant others,
Mm.
then it's applicable to every human everywhere, right? Is that
Yeah,
how we could?
and like think about it. We've all that it's such a good example because we've all been in relationships, right? So like the most extreme is my way or the highway. Like this
Right.
is it. I have to have this. Like how well has that gone for you? That's kind of our approach with,
Yeah.
Ukraine and many other things right now.
Right.
The middle is negotiation, like, hey, if you do this, I'll do this. But even that, when you do that with your partner, like it's transactional. Like, do you really want to
It is
turn your
transaction.
marriage into like a tit for tat? Like there, it becomes it's capitalist, actually. It's like, okay, an equal exchange of value. You give me this, I give me that. The most powerful is compassion. It's like to sit down and say, like, listen, sweetheart, how can I be a better husband to you? What can I do? And then it just melts the heart and the person talks. But then any any decent human being then will say, well, what can I do to be a better partner
Well, of
to you?
course.
Like
That's
it's
yeah.
just natural. And if you don't have a partner like that who's like so selfish, then it's not going to work out anyway. So,
That's the point. It's about
yeah,
the talking. It's about the
yeah,
sitting down and talking in from an open perspective with you, where
yeah,
you are not hardening your heart, where you're not, where you're totally open to their emotions and their feelings. And Thich Nhat Hanh and the Plum Village tradition, they have those practices. That's what they do all the time, even
yeah,
amongst the monks and nuns together, so that it can bypass conflict.
yeah,
But they always say what you want to do with your partner is to say, "Darling, how can I be better?" Even if you're
yeah,
fuming
yeah.
inside, you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
say,
And my
Darling.
my wife and I do this every Sunday. We have these six. One day I want to write a relationship book, and every time I've said that to my wife, she's like, "I'll tell you when you're ready to write a relationship book." But the last time I mentioned it, she actually didn't say that. So I was like, "Oh my
Wow, you
God,
must be
maybe
coming a long way.
maybe I'm getting there." But we do something every Sunday night. We ask each other six questions, and it's not in scope to talk about all of them right now. But one of them is, what's one thing I can do for you this week?
Yeah.
And it's really nice because it just cultivates this compassion. And it's not just Buddhist. There's this famous short story I think a lot of people have read, when they were in school or college, by O. Henry, I
Oh,
think, like
Henry,
the
yes,
gift
I
of the
knew you were
Magi.
going to say.
And you have these couple, they have very little money, but they both want to get each other a Christmas present.
Yeah.
And one of them, the woman has like beautiful long hair, so the husband buys her a brush, and the man has like this watch or something like that, and he needs a chain for it. So like he sells his watch to get a hairbrush. She cuts off her hair and sells it to get him a watch chain,
Watch
and then
chain.
they give him the presents that they don't
No,
need anymore. But it's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful story about compassion. Like those are the things when you're really angry, whatever it is for you. If you're Christian, you can think about Jesus, Saint Francis, whatever, all the nice stories of charity. But somehow you need to really like overwhelm your mind with positive thoughts and feelings.
exactly.
Like it can't just be okay. It can't be like 99% angry. Somehow you need to flood yourself with good good ways of thinking, beneficial, compassionate ways of thinking. And
Yeah,
that's what
I think
meditation does. That's what
that's what
meditation does.
meditation does, and it's what I was saying earlier. It's like when you're lost in these jumbled feelings of angst and anxiousness and grief and whatever, or anger with someone. The best thing you could do is keep coming back to your
Mm.
intention to be a good person. If you keep, even if you're not doing Lamrim practice or analytical meditation, you can do that. You can come back to, because almost everyone has the intention to be a good person.
Yeah, we all want
Almost,
to, of anybody. Donald Trump wants to be loved so much
but
more
so
than we do,
badly.
actually, right? Like that's a reasonable need for love.
Yes,
It's a
because he had
reasonable need
his
for
whole
love.
life, it was never met. And
Yeah.
now it's finally getting close, he thinks,
Yeah.
but I'm not so, he doesn't know. I don't know if anybody really does love him, but we will,
Yeah.
hopefully someone does. But
Oh,
yeah, I honestly think that there's nobody, I just don't believe that there's, maybe there's some people who you classify as evil because they have a psychotic condition, but most people, if they do have the intention to be a good person, and if we can remember that, which we lose connection to that a lot.
yeah. I mean,
Um, and
Buddhism, of course, doesn't believe in good and evil people. It's just it's harmful and beneficial actions. And and yeah,
harmful.
you might need to restrain somebody. Like Vladimir Putin should not be the premier of Russia. That's not a good place for him. Yeah.
So I was trying to end it on a good thing, and
So, oh, I'm
you
sorry.
said
Oh,
Vladimir Putin.
sorry. Go on.
No,
You can
I
cut
mean,
that part out.
no, that's okay. As we say, staying in the pod, everything's real. But yeah, I don't. I think we've exhausted the subject. I don't know if we gave anybody any solutions to any of their problems or any of their ways of thinking. But at least you know how we're thinking about it, and hopefully that's something, right?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. It's nice. It's always nice to have an intentional conversation, something that is meant to make the world a little bit better and each of our minds a little more evolved and compassionate, loving,
That's right.
happy.
Happy, happy, yes. And you and I are really happy people because I can always tell that because we're always giggling. But
Yeah.
so if we can be happy right now, the rest of you can too. So we'll leave it at that. So
Yeah.
thank you, Scott, for doing this impromptu emergency podcast recording, and we'll talk again. And thanks again.
Thank you for the invitation. Always a pleasure.
That's it for this episode. I always have so much fun talking with Scott, even about distressing subjects. And I believe you now understand why after experiencing Scott's engaging and encouraging style. You can find out more about Scott, his book, his teachings, his retreats, using the links in the show notes. Next up, some reminders. We have a new offering in the virtual Everyday Buddhism membership community. It's a guided meditation room or forum. Now's a great time to start, recommit, or strengthen a habit of daily meditation, or just a dedicated time to sit still and just be every day. The days are getting much shorter in the Northern Hemisphere, signaling the time to go within. Also, the angst many of us are suffering following the U.S. election calls for looking within to be sure you are taking care of yourself, acknowledging and feeling your emotions, and watching your thoughts of judgment, anger, and othering. Watching your thoughts allows you to get familiar with the stories you're telling yourself before those thoughts turn to non-productive actions or reactive speech. I will be inviting many Buddhist and meditation teachers to offer guided meditations in this special room, including Scott Snibbe. We open the room with meditations by Kimberly Brown, a returning guest on the podcast. I will also have a mini podcast conversation with each teacher about their insights into meditation. This is a free offering for all of the membership community. You can support this podcast and all the other activities of Everyday Buddhism by becoming a community member. If you do, you will have access to a private member community for announcements, special groups like the meditation room, discussion, and messaging on Heartland, a private platform that's not a Facebook platform. The meditation room or forum for asking questions, opening up discussions about meditations as a support for beginning or sustaining meditation practice. And that new guided meditation room I just talked about in detail. Also, a free 9-week Introduction to Buddhism course offered twice a year, but registration is needed to participate. And a new Introduction to Buddhism course 1.5, which adds more depth to the original introduction course. This group meets monthly with online discussions in between. We have a good reads, good views, and good listens forum to share and learn about books, movies, YouTube, TV, and podcasts. We also offer special bonus podcasts for members only that will not be public, and links to private YouTube videos and special live presentation feeds on our YouTube channel. Whew, all that in the membership community. It's $5 a month. Over in the Everyday Sangha, we are currently studying the books and teachings of the Bright Dawn School of Oneness Buddhism, written by my late teacher, Reverend Koyo Kabose, his father, Reverend Gyome Kabose, and Reverend Gyome's teacher, Reverend Haya Akagarasu. And this is all in the Everyday Sangha. The Sangha is a private donation-supported group that meets virtually via Zoom every other week on Saturday mornings at 10 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. Consider joining the Sangha to be a part of a warm and welcoming Sangha community. You can learn more about the Sangha by viewing the latest bonus YouTube podcast, where me, Bradley Janayo Sensei, and Terry Zenkai Hoskin, our practice leaders, talk about what the Sangha and what everyday Buddhism is all about. If you don't follow me on Everyday Buddhism or on any social media platforms we post in, you can go to the Everyday Buddhism website and join the membership community or the Everyday Sangha. Go to www.everyday-buddhism.com and click on either the tab that says Join Members Community or Join Everyday Sangha. You can also join through Patreon at patreon.com/everydaybuddhism. Links to joining the Everyday Sangha and membership community are posted in the show notes. I thank all of you who contribute. This podcast, the community, and Sangha depend on your donations to continue to exist. I do not seek podcast sponsors and do not ask for financial commitments through paid podcast memberships. So my work and the costs needed to support what I do is entirely self-funded except for your donations. Please consider a one-time or continuing donation through Patreon or on my website's Donate tab. Or you could buy me a coffee. Just use the coffee cup link on the website. You can find all these links also in the show notes. Another way you can help is to rate and review the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. It's important to share the podcast with others if you find it helpful in your life. And if you could, take a minute to comment so people will know why you love Everyday Buddhism. That's all for the announcements. So until next time, keep finding ways to make yours and everyone's days better.